Well, hi everybody. So that's our topic, ATMs We Kick Their Ass, and what we're going to show you in that talk is part of our experience doing pen tests and hacking ATMs. Yeah.
Yeah, so my name is MC, and I do security stuff, and I'm a co-founder of a company called Breakpawn with Yaniv here, and I've spoken at some other conferences, and yeah, I have a bunch of search and things like that. Used to do a lot of QSA work, and there you go.
So I'm Yaniv Miron, aka Lament, security researcher, co-founder of Breakpawn with MC here. Found 0 days in different stuff and talked in different places. That's Breakpawn, our company that we just founded. So we're doing some advanced hacking, ATM, SCADA stuff, reversing, hardware hacking, stuff like that. And we just founded it. It's sort of international because he's from Sweden, I'm from Israel, so it's sort of globally all over the world. And it's sort of a continuation of our previous job. We worked in labs in a previous place, and we sort of took the labs, and that's what we're doing now. So, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, so just keep in mind what we can't really show you actually all the evidence from our testing, obviously, because of confidentiality reasons. But we'll show you some cool stuff. So we can't show the evidence, unfortunately. So the agenda today is we're going to start with some general sort of information about ATMs, and then we're going to talk about the sort of weaknesses that we've come across when we do our testing, and then we're going to talk about a bit how you hack ATMs and some stories from our work out in the field. So what's an ATM? Well, ATM stands for automated teller machine, and as you all know, you can take out usually money. You can do some simple things with your account. And in some countries like Portugal, it's quite advanced. I'm not sure what it's like here in Poland. I haven't used your ATMs here, but like in Portugal, they can pay their bills and buy movie tickets, top up their mobile phone and stuff like that. And ATMs in general, they're quite old and very expensive to manage and maintain. So like I said before, they're quite common like in Portugal, for instance, they have like 13,000 ATMs. It's on every street corner. Whereas like in Sweden, where I'm from, they're actually removing the ATMs in a lot of places, so there's not that many ATMs left. And some of the vendors that you may be familiar with from using an ATM, you'll see them here like NCR, Diebold, Vincor, and Triton and stuff like that. Here's an ATM, and I'm not sure if you've seen like crazy things like this. When they go a bit wrong, you'll see weird error messages from Windows, like here. So where do you find the ATMs? Usually they're like inside a bank or in the lobby or out on the floor like in shopping malls or convenience stores. So the terminology that's used in the industry is sort of on-premise, off-premise, and you can again find them pretty much everywhere. The sort of physical architecture of an ATM, it's basically you'll have a PC inside the enclosure, the steel box, usually with a lock, and then there's a bunch of cash cartridges where they put the banknotes that will be dispensed through a cash dispenser, and there's usually a little printer that prints a receipt. Then in the front you'll have a display monitor and a pin pad, encrypting pin pad, where you put your card in, and you'll punch your pin pad to access the ATM functionality. And then if you flip it around, you'll see there's usually like another little display, an admin display, and at keyboards you can administer the ATM. And of course you have the card reader. There's usually some sort of cameras and sensor and various alarms. We'll talk about that later. Network hardware too, so it's communicate, and then cables, and usually another lock on the cabinet itself. Here's more like a diagram. To the left, you can actually see what it looks like once you open up the ATM from the back. So usually at the top there, the CPU or the computer. You see the receipt printer. To the left there is kind of where you administer the machine, and then at the bottom, all the cash dispensers. And to the right here, you can see sort of a more diagram showing all the various components. That's kind of the major sort of components that you'll find inside an ATM if you open it up. So a bit about the networks. So ATMs communicate over something called EFT networks, and there are controllers, sort of switches, that switch the traffic between the ATMs. And of course, these controls are interconnected, and they will eventually connect usually to some sort of mainframe at the back end, at issuers and acquirers. And another important thing is actually that there are, of course, various sort of usually networks at companies, right? They will have like an ATM testing network, a staging network, and a production network, and various hosts or mainframes that it connects to. We'll come to later why that's important, because that means the attack surface is actually pretty big if you want to hack stuff. Here's a little diagram that sort of explains what I talked about before. You can see ATMs up there to the left. The cloud is like all the switches and networks that interconnect. To the right, you'll have the host or the mainframe. And then it's important to think about, we'll again speak about that later, that there's of course all kinds of job roles that connect to manage these various components. If you want to hack an ATM, you may not necessarily target the ATM itself. You'll actually target some of these job roles that manage or work with the ATM. Something about the OS that runs on an ATM, it's usually some sort of flavor of Windows. So XP, there's something called XP Embedded. That's like a stripped down version of XP. A lot of banks are migrating to Windows 7 right now. And then you'll still come across really old school stuff like 2000 NT, even CE sometimes. And then there's some Linux variants also, which are not that common from what we've tested. And moving up in the application layer, there's something called XFS. That's sort of the platform that's used. So together with the Windows OS, that's what they call the programmable application. So remember I mentioned where it's a bit more complex functionality, where you can buy tickets and stuff like that. That's what they would call programmable application. So that's the Windows OS plus XFS. And then there's different sort of variants of the XFS. So there's like usually some sort of middleware to tie it all together. And yeah. So looking at some of the sort of hardening that they do to sort of protect the ATM itself. Of course, like I said, there's a bunch of locks and steel cages to make it harder to sort of break in. And usually they'll have some sort of mechanism. So if you try to get money out of there, sort of break it out by brute force, it will actually spray like ink on the notes. And something we haven't seen actually, the one we tested, but allegedly there are like sort of gas explosion sensors that will suppress if someone is trying to blow up the ATM with a gas bomb or something. It will actually sense that it's about to happen and sort of release a chemical agent, but we haven't seen those. So. Again, there's an encrypting PIN pad that we talked about. That's to protect your PIN and sort of transaction data. And then you have these, like I said before, various alarms and sensors. So they can sense like sometimes temperature, if the ATM is tilted, or if it's opened or vibrated. It will sort of sense that and do various things. And then, of course, you have like anti-skimming mechanisms. And then usually there's all kinds of monitoring of the ATM itself for sort of suspicious behavior. And of course, when we test these things, this sounds nice that have all this stuff, but usually it's pretty broken on all kinds of levels. So we'll talk more about that level later.
Yeah, so the logical part. So now we know how the ATM is built in a physical way. Now we need to go to the logical, so we know how it's built. We know the OS. Now we need to know what's on top of the OS. So from our experience, there's very old stuff there, like Movie Maker, which is very exploitable, like Adobe Reader, but very old versions like 5 or something like that. Of course, broken and out-of-date anti-malware. And what we're meaning by that is that, let's say there is an antivirus in there. It could be that they're updating the signatures, but they will not update the engine. So the antivirus engine is like, I don't know, from 2005 or something, with some signature updates. But the engine is so bad that it will not catch almost, it will skip most of the new stuff. And of course, weak hardening, which allows you to make a pretty easy privilege escalation. So, hardening, there's usually on desktops, you'll have, you cannot plug USB, you cannot enter CD, you cannot open CMD, stuff like that. In ATM, it seems that everything is open, in most of the ATMs that we saw. So we can party like 1999, because that's the security level. So as we said, also the boot options are not secured. So I would expect in an ATM, to prevent me from booting whatever I want. But if you approach an ATM and pick the lock from behind, because usually there is a lock from behind to open the case which the machine sits. It's not the safe box with the money, but the case that the machine sits. You can easily boot from a USB, city, you can change the boot order, and even if there is a password, we'll see it later on, even if there is a password, it's usually a very basic one or very known one, or you can just Google for it. Yeah. So, of course, there is, in addition, weak file integrity, so there is, they're not checking anything. If you change something in the registry, if you edit some log files, if you even install malware, there's nothing that would detect it because it's very weak. It's like hacking into a machine, I don't know, 10 years ago or something like that. Yeah. So the data. So what happens in very old ATMs? You have like a paper roll, and things are actually being written inside with a small printer on that paper roll. But on the newer ATMs, and when I'm saying newer, it's let's say ATMs that are 10 years old or something like that. Those ATMs might keep local files. Instead of printing them inside the machine, it will actually keep a local logical file. And what happens is that once you have logical access, you can actually grab those files because they're just being kept there unencrypted. Yeah. So this is an example of a tool called Card Recon. And a lot of PCI guys use that tool. And that tool is actually just scanning the machine, or scanning a share, or scanning a hard drive, or a token, or whatever. And it will actually show you in which files you have full PAN numbers, so credit card numbers. So you can just take that tool, or any other tool, or you can write your own, and scan an ATM or scan a share, and it will give you the credit card numbers out of that ATM, because usually they keep it there.
It's funny note, we had cases where this particular tool would crash because we find so many card numbers, like millions, with this buffer or just fucking crashed. We had to file a bug report to the company.
Yeah, and that's from single ATM. So
that's in one ATM. It's pretty funny.
Yeah, so as we said with hardening, there is pretty weak hardening. So what we did, we saw that there is zero or no hardware integrity check. So for example, I would expect if I remove a hard drive, I remove something, the machine should actually detect it. And if I plug my own hard drive, remove the ATM hard drive, plug my own, let's say I placed a malware there or something, the ATM should say, I cannot boot from that hard drive, or there is something wrong. But it seems that you can do whatever you want in those machines. You can replace everything, you can change everything. There's no integrity check in that matter. Of course, you can copy and steal data from the hard drive because there's nothing that will detect you and nothing that will prevent you from doing it. And of course, escape the memory for goodies. So this is, stuff that you can see sometimes in memory. But of course, on an ATM, if you'll scrape the memory, you will see full PAN numbers. So you can just take the memory, put it in a file, then go back home, and actually check the memory and grab the full card numbers from the ATM memory. Now, regarding credentials, so there is either no passwords or there are very known passwords, like we saw on some ATMs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for the admin. Or in some of them, we actually had to Google a bit, and you can see that there's a lot of people that actually collecting those passwords, default password. So you can, find default password for NCR, default password for WinCore, and usually banks or ATM companies are pretty lazy. They will just keep it like that, because it's also very complex to change. Let's say somebody revealed your password. Now, good luck changing 2,000 or 10,000 ATMs passwords, because you can't do it from remote, like BIOS passwords and stuff like that. Another thing that we saw is that the operators that actually handles those machines, they have a user, let's say in the Active Directory, let's say the username is John. You can just hack them in that way, and we'll see it later on, but you can just grab their password from their AD, from the AD. That would probably be the same password on the ATM. Or vice versa. If you already pwned an ATM, you can probably extract John's local password, and that would be the same password in his AD. So we saw a lot of those things. So the patch process. We've heard a lot of promises that they do patch. Okay, what's that? They do patch, but I don't think they do. What happens is that there is 0 to none patching on those machines. So let's say they install them in, 2001, then that's it. That's a machine from 2001, and that's it. Another thing is actually they're outsourcing the patching or the handling process to a third party. So that third party, they might have just 2 or 3 technicians and 10,000 ATMs to handle. So they'll be probably kind of lazy or busy. They will not be able to attend each and every of those ATMs. And of course, the operation. So as you can see, it's either often weak or no with all of those. So authorization, authentication, security monitoring, security logging, they're doing nothing. So even if you're sitting there dealing with an ATM, unless a cop would go by and see, he will ask what are you doing with that machine. I don't think they will be able to monitor you from remote. So it seems it seems crazy because it's such an important machine, but because banks and ATM companies think that either people do not have enough knowledge to deal with ATMs, or people will just be afraid, they just keep it like that. So it's totally unsecure.
Yeah, well, like Yaniv said, I mean, what he just said is actually what's out there, but of course they will tell you that they have all these things, but when you check them, it's usually broken. So thinking about the ATM sort of ecosystem, it's very complex because usually in most countries there's a bunch of sort of entities that will have either logical or physical access to the ATM, right? So if you want to hack an ATM, remember you can actually target one of these sort of entities to sort of go via them to pawn the ATM. And here's a couple you can see on the slide, and often it's even more than that. So remember, all these sort of entities are potential threats that could target the ATM and hack it for various reasons. Maybe to get the data that we talked about or gain access to it. Because remember, once you control the ATM, you can actually use that to attack other ATMs on that sort of network or sort of shared infrastructure like the ATM switches or even the backend, right? So it's quite nice to get hold of an ATM because that's a nice trusted little entity that you can use to attack other parts of the organization. And like we said before, there's always a heavy reliance on the sort of physical security, network isolation, and that sort of stuff. But usually that's pretty weak or broken, to be honest. Here's again a picture to show you the typical sort of job roles or entities that will have physical or logical access. And you can see it's a lot, right? And often there's also gray areas between these job roles. So one of them might think that the other is supposed to monitor something, or they might have, like Yaniv said, outsourced to another party. But maybe they didn't specify exactly what they should do, and no one is checking that they're doing it, right? So there's usually all kinds of gaps. Again, so all these sort of trust relationships to all these entities that manage or have physical access to the ATM span over like everything, like physical, logical processes, meatware, in other words, the people. And so it's a huge attack surface, right? And of course, often there's, like we keep saying, weak OPSEC that you can really sort of punch through if you want to hack stuff. This is a stupid little picture. The sort of methodology, how to pawn an ATM, it's actually nothing different from any sort of hacking, right? I mean, you'll do your intelligence gathering. That's probably the most important step, like we talked about, because you can find out who has access. You can maybe find some credentials you can try. I mean, how you can attack the sort of ATM ecosystem, right? You'll think of some weaknesses that you can try to later exploit, right? And then you plan your attack, you execute your stuff, and you do your damage. And then that's, of course, an iterative process. You might have to get some more intelligence during your attack, plan again, execute, and go back like that, right? And then you clean up and get the hell out. Say you walk up to an ATM and want to hack it, right? So you want to gain physical access. Like we said before, you can pick the lock. Usually it's pretty crappy locks. Or you can even just buy the key like online on eBay or something. They're pretty cheap. You can just use a crowbar and sort of break it open. Or like we said before, all those job roles that we showed, right? You can actually social engineer one of them. And they might give you physical access or help you to get in there. Or you can actually, it takes a bit longer, of course, to go work for one of these entities that has access. And once you have physical access, you can do things like put a hardware keylogger there, leave it there, and then you can collect the credentials to break in, to actually log into the computer. Or you can put like, if you want to have remote access, you can put like a Dropbox and attach like a 3G modem, so you can remotely do stuff. And like I said before, once you have sort of physical access, you can start attacking other ATMs to do whatever you want, right? And use silly things like firewire attack to dump the memory or escalate your privilege.
Also think how cheap it is, like let's say the 3G modem option. So, break the lock, either you buy a key at eBay for like $3, $4, or just buy a set of picks and open it because it's very simple lock. Then that 3G model is like what, 20, 30 euros, and another SIM card with data, let's say with 20 gigabytes of data, that's another 20, 30 euros. So let's say in 50 euros, you can sort of put a bug inside an ATM and control it from remote. So.
Yeah,
and we saw it happen. So.
Yeah, and these attacks definitely are happening. You can read the newspaper almost every week, someone doing that sort of thing. They're breaking in, putting some stuff. Most of them are not that clever though, because they get caught, but that's another funny one I thought. Put your pin and then press this key, but yes.
Go ahead.
So authentication, we talked already about that. Usually there's nothing fancy like smart card or something cool like that. It's usually very weak or stupid passwords. So either you can Google for it or you can even speak to the technician. That's probably the best way, to just find the technician and just speak to him, and he will probably tell you. Then you get the sort of the backstory, right? And we already talked about hardware keyloggers and social engineering.
And also in smart cards, when I walk to the teller in my bank, usually they have smart cards, when they go up, when they move from their computer, they will take it with them. So yes, their endpoint is extremely secure. But, if you go back to the ATM, that could do a lot of harm in the organization. That's totally the opposite. So it's not just passwords, it's extremely weak passwords. So it seems that the banks are thinking that if their employees are using smart cards and RFID tags and all of that, everything is secured, but it's just wrong. So.
Yeah, again, what we said. I mean, it turns into regular pen tests. You can use whatever exploits you need, whatever, to pwn all that sort of old stuff, or PS tools, do some old school DLL code injection, firewire.
Also, those things like firewire is like what, 10 years old?
Exactly, it's really old stuff now.
And then PS tools, I'm not sure how old it is, but you can easily get privilege escalation to system. And of course, exploits, it's ridiculous. You don't need like the coolest 0 days or something like that. You can just use, old exploits from ExploitDB or Metasploit or something like that, because the things are so old in there. Yeah.
And make sure to bring, if you're going to have hardware keyloggers, bring your PS2, because a lot of them don't have USB, obviously, it's like old stuff. Then the data stuff, we talked about that already. Scan for card data, not only pads, actually also full track data, so you can actually clone the card if you want.
So detection bypass. So what we saw with the alarms, we did a test at specific company somewhere in Europe, and they had a nice sticker on the ATM that says, if you touch it or if you open it or something, there will be an alarm, and the cops will come and blah blah blah. So because we were testing it, we actually asked to try it, to open that ATM and see if any alarm will happen and if the cops will show up and all of that. And then the guy that worked with us told us from that company, from that bank, told us, okay, let me just check with the team that monitors the alarm that they're ready to see that you're opening that ATM. And then we told him, okay, go ahead. And he went for like half an hour or 40 minutes or something. And then when he came back, he told us, you know what, there is no team to monitor the alarm. So that was pretty funny. Then we said, okay, never mind. Let us just try the alarm as is. And then we actually opened the box and there is no alarm. So what happened, it's all fake. There is no team, there is no cops that will show up. There is no alarm. It's just a sticker to frighten you that there is something there. So this is just one of the things we saw. Of course, that also goes to the weak and no monitoring. Nobody cared. We opened ATMs all over the world. Nobody cares. Nobody will show up. So unless you're very unlucky, or it's a very specific secure ATM, but from what we saw, most of them are just like that.
Yeah, I mean, another thing is like, remember, usually it looks like there's a camera in the ATM. But remember, some countries have quite strict privacy legislation, right? So it should be working, right? But often it's turned off because they're not allowed to actually record. So again, it's supposed to work and be there, but it's not working at all, actually.
Yeah, and then, well, of course, AV, we talked about it, very old engine, so they might update the signatures, but the engines are very old. So if you use even the crappiest packers, or if you just open the file and do some hex changes in the exact place when the AV is detecting that file, you can easily bypass the AV. IDS and IPS, as we saw, there's either nothing or very old and unknown ones, so it's almost not there. And regarding tripwire, we saw that they're really trying to put tripwire on a lot of ATMs. So I'm not sure if all of you are familiar. Tripwire is sort of a tool to monitor stuff. There are different templates. You can pick a template, and then it will monitor specific stuff on that machine. And then if it, something bad is happening, it will send an alert to a SIM/SOC team or something like that. So I would say tripwire is a pretty good tool. The thing is, the way they implement it on some of the ATMs makes it totally useless to protect against hackers. It could protect against, a technician that tries to steal some money from the $20 bill cartridge or something like that, but it will not protect against hackers because it's configured totally wrong.
Yeah, and remember, you may have some sort of detection, right? But then that's not enough, because once you detect something, you have to respond and do something about it, right? And that's even worse, because usually there's no response at all, like we said, right? Or it's quite weak. So another thing, they never verify these things. So they claim to have this and that, and usually it's, like we keep saying, broken or not working at all, actually. And okay, so network attacks. So remember, some of these ATMs are actually managed sort of over the network, so they might have some operators who sit somewhere to do stuff from their desktop. So of course, that's a nice sort of target if you want to hack these ATMs. You go for the operators and pawn their desktop, and then you sort of get their access to everything, right? And we already talked about, again, attacking other parts of the whole sort of networks and backend and that sort of thing. And we already talked about this again, but that's probably one of the best ones. I mean, really figure out in your intelligence gathering what job roles have access. And then you just do your social engineering on these people, and then you can get some really nice one is actually other white hats or security testing firms, or they might do code reviews on the application and stuff like that. So if you pawn their email, for instance, you can read their email, and often there they bounce around where the repositories are for the code or even credentials. That way you can, and also read the reports, and then you don't have to look for the vulnerabilities. You'll just have them, and then you can exploit them, right? So that's a really good one.
And another one regarding security guards, for example. So we're usually speaking English. So we were doing a test in a non-English country, non-English speaking country. They don't learn it at school and so on. And we actually stayed there pretty late, at like, 9 or something. And then a security guard approached us, to see because he was sort of patrolling the area to see if somebody's doing anything. And then he asked us in his language, probably what are you doing here? But we just replied in English. And because he couldn't communicate with us, he just said, okay, and left. So this is a nice trick against security guards. Just use a different language and they will just say, screw that.
And there's another really funny one, actually, where he did speak English, but not very good. So he almost felt like a bit embarrassed to speak. But he would answer every question. So I was there like another one of these kind of late at night. I didn't wear my badge or anything. And he answered every question. I just asked questions about the whole alarm system and all this sort of stuff. And he gave all the information, right? So I mean, it's usually pretty bad.
Okay, so that's how, let's do it, how to pawn an ATM. So those are the general steps. So obtain intel, that's what we gave you in those slides, how an ATM is built and what apps are in there and OS and all of that. So I assume you can take it from here. Of course, best to be stealthy. So yes, we said that they're not monitoring and the AV is crap and the IPS is crap and everything, but still you need to keep some sort of level of being quiet, don't make too much noise with crazy stuff. And then of course work smart with social engineering. So don't approach each and every guy working in that bank, start asking questions because they will get the point that sometimes. So just don't make too much noise. Now, general tips, and I think this is a very important slide because we had a lot of issues, and I think those are nice tips. So a single reboot of an average ATM in Europe is 20 minutes. So just think about, let's say you wrote a piece of code, you want to see if it's working. You installed it on that Windows XP machine, on this Windows XP ATM. Now you want to reboot it. It will take 20 minutes. That means that the ATM will not be available for 20 minutes. Now, I don't think the banks would care, but if a customer approaches an ATM, he wants to withdraw money. He used to withdraw money every day from that specific ATM. Now he sees that the ATM is down. He might call the bank or might call the ATM company and tell them, listen, what's going on? And remember, sometimes when you're writing code, it's not perfect, so you need to reboot twice or 3 times or 4 times. So just imagine you can sit for 2 hours next to that ATM just to see if a piece of code is working, a piece of malware that you installed. So be very careful. Probably if you're going to reboot it, do it at night, you know, or something like that when there's not a lot of people. Well, as we know, there's lack of proper testing on ATMs. So mostly the banks just tell us, you know, it's an ATM. Nobody knows how to hack it. Hackers do not mess with ATMs. Yes, there are some, you know, criminals that will blow it or stuff like that. But hackers, they don't care about ATMs. So of course they're not fixing it in the logical level. Of course, there is silos. So in big corporations, you know, people care only about their own position. They don't care about the company. So let's say that there is this guy, he's in charge on the physical security of the ATM. And then there is another guy in a different department, he's in charge on the logical part. If they will not work together, there will be gaps between the physical and logical layers that we can use. And from what we saw, people does not like to work together in those places. So there is a lot of gaps between things. You know, one guy is in charge on the OS security, there is another guy in charge on the application security, and you know there is a big mess with those ATMs. And of course, build a good threat modeling or good attack tree. You know, before you're going to attack an ATM, learn it and know exactly what's going on with it before you actually execute something.
And also argue with the customer. If they say you can only touch the an application or something, try to have a much wider scope, because that's how the real attacks work. Yeah, okay, so we actually covered a lot of this already, like you break stuff, and one funny thing is, of course, there's still these sort of old school attacks where they put like silicone to seal all the cracks so that it's airtight, and then they blow it up with a gasoline bomb, right? Or they smash the ATM with a tractor or something, pull it out. So this is South Africa, where they blow up ATMs a lot. Here again, we already talked actually about this, right? So if you want to pawn an ATM over the network, target actually the operators who have such access, right? Same here, we talked about the developers. Maybe you can go ahead, we can talk about that.
Yeah. So the central update service. So it's the same thing, you know, instead of attacking the ATM directly, you can attack an update server that updates the ATM and then put some malware in there. So that malware will be shoved into your ATM. And from what we saw, almost nothing is encrypted while using ATMs. Well, actually the transaction, you know, when you put your card and ask for some money, that transaction would be probably encrypted in most ATMs. But the rest, you know, like updates and the actual hard drive that stores the data will be unencrypted. So it's pretty easy if you cannot have direct access to the ATM, just shove some updates with your stuff, and then you could access directly to the ATM. Of course, sysadmins, that's the same thing. Where was that? California?
I think it's San Francisco.
San Francisco. That's okay. So we try to take our experience and build some sort of a story how to hack into an ATM. The bad thing is that we cannot show you actual proofs, because then some companies will sue us, and we don't want to do it. We don't want it to happen. But the thing is, our mindset when hacking an ATM is not the money in the ATM, because usually you have, I don't know, let's say $100,000 in that ATM. So yes, you can either hack it or just blow it up with some guns or gas or something and just steal the money. But what we're thinking as hackers is it's pretty good to sort of sit as a leech on that ATM. And once you control that ATM, you can either attack into the organization, deeper into the mainframe and so on, because that ATM is connected to a lot of places. And the thing is, from what we saw, banks are not suspecting their own ATMs attacking them. So even in the bank's internal network, there's not a lot of protection from that sort of scans the communication from the ATM to the bank. So that's the story that we try to build. So of course, this is the physical part. An easiest way will be just to go to a standing ATM, like in 7-Eleven or something, not a hole in the wall, not like inside a bank, but just a standalone ATM. And there's usually a lock behind it. Just pick it very easily. It's extremely easy to pick those locks. Then you will get access to the actual machine. Once you get access to the actual machine, then you can move to the logical part. Of course, if you need a BIOS password, just Google it. So if it's NCR, just Google NCR default BIOS password. If it's default and default BIOS password, you can find those passwords. I think we saw them in a lot of Asian websites. I'm not sure why, but it's kind of.
It's funny. Sometimes we'd find like the password, like, I don't know, Indonesian manual or something, but it would work like in the country where we were. So it might leak like in other places.
So this is one phase. So about the alarm, as we said, there is no alarm from what we saw. And of course, it could be off, or you can, if it's on, it's an unencrypted packet. So actually, the ATM sends a certain packet to a control room, says, you know, something is wrong with me. You can just capture that packet or disconnect the ATM cable for a few seconds or something, and then resend your own packet that will say, yeah, everything is okay. Of course, you need to learn what packets to send. That's why you need to do the monitoring ahead. You need to monitor the ATM communication, see what kind of packets the ATM sends every now and then. Yeah, so this is the logical part. This is sort of, so we have the physical part. This is one logical branch. So what we can do is actually take the hard drive, duplicate it, and then use it later. Now, what can we do with the hard drive? First, we can just duplicate it and insert the original hard drive with our own malware or with our own backdoor and control that ATM, and then do transactions, you know, from the ATM, force the mainframe to do a transaction of, I don't know, $1 million to our account or to a fake account or something. So it's way more than the actual cash in the machine that we don't care about. Then what we can do is actually look for vulnerabilities on the actual app because as we said, they're not investing a lot of effort in security. So in some countries, the app that you will see on the screen is just a simple web app. So you have like Windows XP with IS, I don't know, IS5, and then some website serving you. That's it, that's the ATM. So of course, you can also put a 3G modem with a SIM card. We talked about it. You can just put it in there and then control that ATM from remote. So you don't need any cables going to it. That's a different branch. So if we don't want to make a lot of noise, because if you take the hard drive out, as we said, it's going to take at least 20 minutes to boot it out. So it takes, I don't know, a minute to take it out, then 20 minutes of boot, and it takes you a minute to put it in. That's like 22 minutes that the ATM is down. And that's if it went you well on the first try. If it's going to, you know, take 3 tries, that's 66 minutes when the ATM is down. So that's a different branch, how to do it without taking the ATM down. So what we're saying is that bypass the AV, very simple, you know, there is very known ways to bypass AVs, and because the engines are so old, you can look at methods from 2005 and use them. And then, of course, you need to collect some information. What is the exact OS? I would say 90% it's Windows XP unpatched, maybe without any service specs or anything. And of course, you need to check the patch level, the OS, the application, so on. So collect some information. So you could approach that ATM again when you're prepared with the right exploits and the right tools. Then, of course, now we know, now we get access to the ATM because we picked the lock. We know what OS it's running because we already checked. We know what kind of apps is running in there. We know that security is crap. We know that usually the alarm is just a fake thing. It's not really working. So what we need to do is just take it all together and hack it like an old machine. That's it. So it's not a special ATM now. You don't need to be special hackers or something. Just hacking like a very old machine. Well, now that that's what we said, you can just penetrate deeper into the organization because what happens, banks are usually, ATMs are in their trusted networks. So it's not like, I would expect that it will be in some sort of a DMZ or something. They will not trust those machines because, they're not physically in their place. They're all over the country, spreaded. So who knows what people are doing with them. So I would expect they will be in a DMZ, but from what we saw, they're pretty trusted machines. So you can get anywhere, you can go through different VLANs, you can go, even connect directly to the mainframe from an ATM. So that's crazy.
Yeah, so it's how to fix these things, like we said before. You just have to, it's just hard security work. I mean, you have to put prevention, detection, and response in place. And of course, make sure that this stuff works. So once in a while, actually verify that these things are working, because there seems to be a lot of trust and stuff that's actually never verified. So that's very important. Here's some other funny stuff, and yeah. So to wrap up some of the things we talked about, it's all the complex stuff. There's a lot of security about obscurity. You should test properly and have a good scope when you test, right? And what we said, evaluate and then fix these things, and make sure that you don't have these silo problems. It's a big problem, as we see, when they scope these sort of pen tests. They only want to look at one little thing.
I think it's sort of like, you know, it's very similar to hacking mainframes and hacking SCADA, hacking ATMs, because what you know, the sort of the official people, the CISOs and the security managers assume is that people do not have access to those things, or it's so, you know, very expensive, so they don't know how to hack it. They don't know what's going on in there. And as you can see, mainframes these days are pretty easy to hack, and there's some big incidents. SCADA is becoming very, you know, there's tons of people hacking different SCADA stuff, and I would say ATM is the third in line, because it's, again, a lot of people do not know what's going on in there, but once you know, it's extremely easy to hack.
Yeah, and the focus is usually on the cache part, not the sort of things we've been talking about. That's it.
Yeah, any questions? Yeah.
Just a second, please.
Okay, so my question is, if it's really that bad, if you know any company who is properly set up and the security is in place, or all the companies you know are, you know, containing threats?
Well, it could be that there are some companies that are secure, but from our experience, we tested different ATMs in different countries, and we saw the same scenario. So from what we saw, we haven't saw any secure ATM, right?
Not really, no.
Yeah,
I mean,
so.
I mean, you can't, I mean, nothing is absolute, but I think these are kind of the general trends. I mean, it's pretty crap, to be honest, and that's the way it is. But again, remember, it's a business decision. Some of these companies, once we even did our testing, they will sort of accept the risk and say, okay, we'll just live with that, and there you go. I mean, all we can do is sort of show them, right, so they can make that decision, but it's pretty bad, I would say, in general.
And if anybody knows a secure ATM, if you can approach us and point it out, that would be nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry? No, not in Poland.
Not yet.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, we will be happy to check if you can help us, you know, arrange an ATM or something. Okay. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you very much. Big applause, please.